Good morning, everyone.
Good
And
morning.
good morning. Michael,
What's the Shayla, as we say?
okay. Michael, why don't you ask, why don't if we do this, we're going to start late. And if it's okay with everyone, I think it's an interesting discussion. And I don't mind. I don't mind it. I'm going to leave
Our audio visual aid is there.
Yeah, there's Bruce.
Yes. So
yes or no? Yes or no?
So if I think that it would be reasonable to ask your question now, and then we'll get into the rest of our discussions. I'm so happy to see everyone. By the way, I do also want to say that if you do not know already, Helene is having some difficulties with COVID, and so some people know more about it than I do, but she, so think of her.
Marty, I just got off the phone with her. She called me about 15 minutes ago.
Okay.
She says she has a very mild case.
Oh, good.
I know originally the email said that she basically had laryngitis. She's over that. She sounded fine.
Good.
She's just very, very fatigued. So she's
sure.
Not
and at her
us
age
today.
and her other medical issues, I understand. But
Ruth Ann, I spoke to her right after you did a few minutes ago.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, she's feeling okay. She's very, very tired.
Yeah.
But she sends her regards to everyone. She's going to take a pass on the energy of joining, but she appreciates it.
Sure, that's a given. And I see Rabbi Mary will be here. Michael, I guess she's listening in by phone or something. Do you know Ruth Ann?
Mary, I have no idea.
Okay, whatever. Well, she'll join us. Before we start, we'll discuss this. Michael, why don't you ask your question of the rabbi? He may be able to know.
Okay, I'll frame it as quickly as I can.
Please.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning, everyone.
I thought that and I'm trying to get a conservative rabbi to be part of our mix on Shabbos for the Torah study, and I think that would be quite interesting. But I'm trying, but I don't know if it's going to really come to fruition. However, but one question I had now that Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is fast approaching, is the sounding and the hearing of the shofar. Okay, so the conservative would not, or the conservative won't do it on a Shabbat.
Right.
But how many? If a reform does it on a Shabbat, is that a mitzvah to do it on a Shabbat? And is it a mitzvah to hear it on a Shabbat?
Let me see if I can answer it. The answer is simple, but it has complicating implications.
Right.
You're correct in that the traditional community, conservative, Orthodox, and even more traditionally oriented Reform, would prefer and advise not to blow the shofar on Shabbat. Traditionally, you do not. The mitzvah, as you're referring to, the mitzvah actually from halacha is to hear it, not to be the one who sounds or blows the shofar. The mitzvah is to hear the shofar. The rationale, we might add other interpretations to it, but the actual rationale for not blowing the shofar on Shabbat is to relieve the shofar blower of carrying something and of doing work on Shabbat. Okay, so that's why it's postponed till the second day, which won't fall on Shabbat. And conservative, traditional, Orthodox do have the second day. Reform does not. normally does not observe a second day. Therefore, the question to the Reform rabbis was, if if you're only observing Rosh Hashanah one day, which is more important, relieving the shofar blower of the obligation of carrying and working, or the opportunity for the whole congregation to fulfill the mitzvah of hearing and listening to the shofar? Their decision was that it's more important. It's higher in the priority levels for everyone to be able to hear the Shabbat, to hear the shofar, especially if it's only going to be observed for one day. So that's the background to your question.
Long answer.
Excuse me, I have another question. Couldn't you also hear the shofar without it being blown? The sound could be in your heart.
There are probably those who would say that would count, but most of the authorities
Right.
that I would cite would say no. The preference would be to hear the shofar, in public, personally, through the auditory canal. That's why it's a mitzvah. It's not a halachic mitzvah, but a mitzvah in the sense of doing good deed, that a lot of people will go to residents' homes, senior citizen residents, hospitals, whatever, to those people who can't come to the synagogue. And they won't go through the whole prayer service, but they'll blow the shofar just so everyone has the opportunity of hearing it.
Now, if it's a situation where it's not supposed to be blown in on the Shabbat in certain circles,
it's not supposed to be blown because to protect
Right.
the implication that the shofar blower is defiling the holiday by having carried or practiced or doing extra work.
I get that, but I didn't. Let me complete the question.
Yeah.
I know in certain circles you don't. Based on what you said, it's more important actually to hear it.
Right.
But if you're hearing it on a day that's on a day that it's not supposed to be sounded, according to the rabbi, is that is it a mitzvah or not? If it's done on the Shabbat where it's not supposed to be, according to the rabbi, if somebody's hearing it on that day, is it still a mitzvah? That's what I'm trying to get.
Michael, I understand, and I hear the contradiction that you're pointing out, but you have to remember that reform is not based on the traditional mitzvot. They use the traditional mitzvot as guidelines for making decisions about personal practice, not that we are bound to every single one of them. So it's recognizing what the importance was of here. I mean, Rosh Hashanah is not called Rosh Hashanah in the Torah. It's called Yom Teruah. It's called the day of sounding the shofar. So the reform movement, reconstructionist movement, renewal movements, whatever, have all made this decision, and I think it's an appropriate one, that it's more important to hear the sound of the shofar and react to the sound of the shofar than to prohibit it if that's the only chance that you have to hear it in the congregation. That's my
Okay, David is with us, and I think that's a Wendy hand.
That is a Wendy hand.
That's a Wendy hand. Now, this may be a little bit of comic relief, but it goes on to what we're talking about. If that one person in the synagogue has to do a little extra work to blow the shofar, they can say, I will be the martyr, I'll do this, and everybody else can enjoy it. Just do it, because the shofar really is wonderful.
There, incidentally, Wendy,
Yeah.
I don't know if it happens now, but back in the 50s and 60s, that many years ago, I know that there were Reform congregations that specifically would hire literally a Shabbos goy, a chauffeur goy.
Oh,
Okay, they would contact the symphony orchestra. Bruce is volunteering.
That would be me.
Okay,
That would
all
be
right.
me.
Right.
Okay,
They would contact the symphony orchestra and hire the French horn player, or
small
whatever.
mouthpiece, I got it.
Right. So that it wouldn't be a Jewish person who was not, who was
Right.
profaning the mitzvah, but everybody else got to hear it.
Right.
couldn't they give the rabbi give a special what do they
Doesn't
call
work that way, Mark.
it?
Sorry.
Okay,
At least
okay,
not-
that's
not-
okay.
Not
Because
in the yeshiva
doctors,
that I went to.
because
No
doctors, if they're
dispensation.
to save a life or things like that,
Absolutely.
the special
There's-
dispensation.
Oh, absolutely. There's a response from the Holocaust
Right.
where an Orthodox rabbi in the concentration camp said, "This is the only chance I know that I have the chance today to blow a shofar. I don't know what will happen tomorrow. It's Shabbat. I want the people to hear the shofar."
Yes,
Right.
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, Don, what was your question?
Question, yeah, because most of these arguments were mounted for the digital age. But now the sound of the shofar can be recorded and with no intervention at all, can be heard.
But that's using
Heard
electricity.
on Shabbat, even though it was
Doesn't
recorded.
Phil?
No, that's
Ricky,
using
go ahead.
electricity. That's using electricity. You'd have to hit a switch. There's the other.
Nobody has to do anything. I mean, it's.
Yes, somebody has to.
Somebody had to do the work.
Somebody has to hit.
For
the
Shabbat, they had to do the work, but not on Shabbat. So, but anyway, to make it even simpler, you could blow the shofar a few seconds before Shabbat, and then depending on the speed of sound, it would reach the ears of the listeners on Shabbat. So that, I mean, once you get into the various, the details, you
Okay.
could end up getting.
Yeah, you're getting
Good.
Is there anything like
Good comment. Good comment.
Real simple, a real simple way to make.
We're adding layers onto this
Yeah.
discussion that make it a little more difficult. Miri, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I just, Shabbat Shalom. What I wanted to share with you is that there was a question among the rabbis, modern rabbis, that you send letters to the rabbis since the Talmud is closed. So the question was, that men cannot hear the voices of women because it's a sexual feeling, in the synagogue and so forth. So the question was what Don is asking. If it's a recording, is that considered the same type of rule? So in modern in modern times, that question, Don, comes up very, it's just like the question is turning your car is like feeding your donkey, or the fire versus electricity. So those are big questions. The only thing that I remember learning about the shofar was that there need to be an intention to come and to hear the shofar. Let's say that you're walking by a synagogue, going wherever you're going, and someone was blowing. That is not considered hearing the shofar. I hope, Rab Norman, that I'm saying it correctly. It has been many years ago.
No. I think it's correct, because the interpretation, the bracha is lishmoa kol shofar. Okay, as it not just hearing any shofar, it's hearing the kol, which is identified as the holy voice or the holy sound of the shofar, which would only be blown on the holiday. And then, Marty, if I may, the same thing holds with Yom Kippur, which is why in traditional congregations, you must wait until after sunset to end Yom Kippur so that you can sound the shofar. Okay, because it wouldn't happen before sunset in a traditional congregation.
So if you blew it on a Friday evening before sunset,
For what purpose?
to herald the first eve of Rosh Hashanah. It's not yet part of the Sabbath. You're blowing it before the Sabbath. Is that the same thing as blowing after sundown on blowing it at the end of Yom Kippur?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think it would, because if you're blowing it, then that's more like a call to assembly,
Right.
kind of thing. You're not blowing it for the
Got it.
holy, or the Michael's word before for the mitzvah,
Right.
of hearing the shofar sounded specifically on the holy day.
Okay.
I think that's what
It's
Thank you. Yes, Ruth Ann.
Marty, you gotta move to Squirrel Hill, okay? Where for the month before the high holidays,
They
you get
start blowing.
inundated with shofar blowings.
Yes.
Because everybody is practicing and the kids are learning, and you spend the whole month, and it's beautiful. I loved it. I really miss that here, that it's so quiet, but it doesn't count. It meant
Right.
nothing until you got to shul.
Exactly.
If I may,
good
it's
point.
not only them practicing, it's if it's late at night, they've been reciting slichot, which you're supposed to do not just only one night, but the entire month of Elul. And in some communities, that those prayers end with a one blast of the shofar. Yeah, so it's not, if it's really
Right.
late at night.
Yeah, this was
Is there any significance between the word sounding and blowing? That's my last question.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
In
the same
Hebrew,
thing.
in Hebrew, it's the same.
So let's, Pastor Bruce had his hand up, and then then we need to move on.
Well, thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to this conversation. It's something, of course, that enters into the realm of the studies that I have done as well, and the responses of people during that century of what was happening at the time. So it's all very good. But I was glad that Ruth Ann brought up the 30 days before, which of course is called teshuvah, and returning and repenting and all of those things with the slichot. How did you say that, Rabbi? Did I get that right? Yeah. So anyway, all those things are a part of something that I've kind of traditionally, I think it begins, if I'm not mistaken, next week. I think it does. But yeah, I had heard that the shofar blowing was important at the end of those prayers as kind of a call to warning, a call to make sure you're right with God as you get to the high holy days. That was kind of what that was all about. And so I was glad you brought that up, Ruth Ann.
Thank you. Thank
Marty,
you.
I'm going to be nasty and say just one more comment. And
Okay.
that, just a very quick one, is that the mitzvot are connected with their time, the time that is supposed to be done. It's a very strong connection. Actually, there is a sentence that says, if the time has passed, you don't have to do the sacrifice. Avar zmano batel korbano. So it's the time that you do mitzvot is very much the issue that needs to be respected. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. Yes, Rabbi. And then
No, I know you
let
want to
Don go,
start.
because I'm gonna do a joke, and we can end the discussion that way.
okay.
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 Actually, I'm jumping into this Torah study because last week there was a lot of discussion on the role of women in Sinai. And so I spent the week researching that, and I've just put it in the chat box. I've just put a link for a really interesting reflection on women in Sinai during Exodus and the role, and it taught me a lot, or I learned a lot anyway. So anybody's free to look that up. And back to the discussion on the software, it makes me realize you never want to build a synagogue on a time zone line.
Right.
That's very good. Very good. Yes, Rabbi.
Okay, so it came to pass one day. I don't know, a neighborhood like Ruth Ann's Squirrel Hill or Cleveland Heights, where I was, or something, but a very traditional kind of community. That the man was getting ready to go to bed, and he realized that his alarm clock was broken, and he wanted to set an alarm clock to get up for the next morning, but he didn't really know what time it was when he was going to bed. So he thought and he thought and he thought and he thought, and then he opened the window and he heard all the shofar blasts being going, like Ruth Ann was talking about, and he yells out the window. He says, quiet, sheket, that's enough. Don't you know what time it is? And somebody else says, of course, it's 11:30. It's time that we finished our slichot. Leave us be. Thank you. And he takes his time and goes to sleep.
That's good. That's good. Well, David, why don't you do your reading?
Okay, thank you, Marty. And I'm really glad to see Mary back.
You're muffled.
David, you're not coming through. I don't know if it's your speaker or if
I
it's
hear better now.
Yes.
it's a little better.
Okay, let me bring this a little bit closer. And today's quotation will be from Shakespeare. Better, can you hear it better? Well, let me just try.
That's better.
Okay, as those of us who are familiar with Shakespeare know that he has astrology in almost every one of his plays. When beggars die, there are no comets seen. But did Shakespeare really believe in that? He did not, as he writes in Sonnet 14. Not from the stars do I my judgment pluck, and yet methinks I have astronomy, but not to tell of good or evil luck, of plagues, of dearths, or seasons' quality. Nor can I fortune to brief minutes tell, pointing to each his thunder, rain, and wind, or say with princes if it shall go well, by oft predict that I in heaven find. But from thine eyes my knowledge I derive, and constant stars, in them I read such art, as truth and beauty shall together thrive, if from thyself to store thou wouldst convert. Or else of thee, else of this I prognosticate, thy end in truths and beauties, doom and date. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting. Well, now I guess we can break into Torah. By the way, Michael, that was a very interesting discussion that you started, and I appreciate it. I learned a few things, and the rabbis, Pastor Bruce, and all the others that participated in the discussion. It was very meaningful.
Thank you, Marty. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to read our prayer in English this week. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe. You have sanctified us through your commandments and commanded us to busy ourselves in things of Torah.
Amen.
Amen. I'm also going to add Talmud after all these discussions and all the law that has come from that. Where did we leave off last week?
21 in the middle of the paragraph that started with verse 7, 7, 8, 9, somewhere.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought. I came across an interesting subject that dovetails into these discussions. Why are our rules and laws, the Mishpatim, why are they so important? And Plato discusses this in his essay called The Republic. There is a mythologic, there's a story in which a man, a Gyges, he's a shepherd, and he finds there has been an earthquake and a crevice opens up, and he looks down in the crevice and he sees the skeletal remains of someone with that of a horse, and he notices that there's a ring on the finger of that individual. And he takes the ring and he puts it on. And then in twisting the ring so that the crown of the ring is on the inside of his finger, he becomes invisible. Okay. Think of it has, so this has also been called the ring of invisibility. Some of you also have heard of the cloak of invisibility, but it's also when you can reinterpret it as the ring of anonymity. Nobody knows you're there. With a cloak, when you're hidden, nobody knows that you're there. Okay, and so when we think of moral behavior, is it just for when you are with other people, or is it for all time? When you are seen or unseen?
Well, it's like hiding in plain sight. Ever hear of that? Hiding in
Yes,
plain
that's
sight.
what this is. But the moral behavior is it, and this is part of Plato's discussion. Does morality count for only when you're seen?
No.
Because this guy goes on, Gyges goes on to do lots of immoral things for personal gain. He commits adultery, stealing, murder. Okay, I won't go into the whole story, but all of the things that we're told we're not supposed to do. And so when we have a moral code, is it for all the time we are alive, or just when people are not looking?
It's all the time.
Don? Yeah, okay, go ahead, Michael, and then Don, and then.
A moral code is a code of conduct, I would say. It's supposed to be practiced every day in every way that I could see. In practice, in speech, in teaching. That's what I would believe a moral code is.
Thank you. Very good. Don.
Yeah, well, in the Republic, it had to do with objective law, It's not what somebody
It's
said.
justice. It's justice. Yes.
And it has to do with how that law is enforced. So it's directly relevant to what's taking place in Sinai. what we're studying right now, because that is the unfolding of law, objective law. But also it makes me think, I think it was Sartre was trying to define postmodern man, and he painted a scene of postmodern man as kneeling in front of the door looking through a keyhole at the rest of the world. But he could see the rest of the world, but nobody could see him, except he had the sense that somebody was standing behind him, looking at him. And that, to me, that always gave the feeling of the ring of Gyges, that you are being observed by God, no matter what you do and where you are. Somebody is you are under observation.
Very good. Very good. Yes, Ricky.
All right.
I'll come back to you, Michael.
Just for today booklet that everybody in the program and Al-Anon uses. Just for today, I will exercise my soul in 3 ways. I'll just give you the first one. I will do somebody a good turn and not get found out. If anybody knows of it, it will not count.
And by the way, that dovetails into some of the writings of Maimonides. And so you can see how this plays out. Pastor Bruce, did you have your hand up?
I did.
Excuse me, Michael first, and then Pastor Bruce.
Yeah, if I may, let me bring this moral code to present day, and I'd use Israel for this. And this is kind of the rock and a hard place for Israel. Israel has a moral code, and this is one of the reasons why their enemies attack and take advantage of them. For example, and there are probably many in Israel, as I understand it, and these are things as I understand, so I hope I'm correct. Israel is not allowed to fire upon an ambulance. It's their moral code not to do it. And in the West Bank, the Palestinians and Hamas, they move around their bomb-making material, ammunition, and guns in ambulances because they know that Israel won't fire upon them. So they take advantage of that because Israel has a moral code. And there are other, I'm not going to go on, but there are other examples of that. And that puts a position in Israel between a rock and a hard place because they're taken advantage of because of their moral code.
Okay. There was another, yes, Pastor Bruce. Thank you.
This so reminds me, if you are fans of Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings.
Exactly.
And there's so much of this in there for good, being invisible and doing something like Ricky just said from that.
Let anybody catch it.
But I'm just saying, so good things happened with the guy that had the ring on and turned invisible, or the invisible cloak, because both of them were used in the books. And so, but also whoever had the ring, if they were evil, they would do things for evil purposes. And so it just depended on who you were and how everything was going on. But when you look at life in general, I think that the bottom line would be, God knows all, God sees all, and we should always be thinking in terms of doing good to everyone and anyone, whether it's seen or unseen, period. Sorry to be such a hardliner on that one, but that's the way.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I'm going to ask the rabbi. Excuse me. I only know a little about Maimonides. Rabbi was shaking.
Most of us do only.
Okay. But could you expand on this from the Jewish
Well,
perspective?
I think the connection that you're referring to is in the steps of tzedakah,
Yes,
where the highest, like think of it as
Right.
a ladder, and then the highest rung is to contribute to someone or to help someone anonymously, so that you don't know who the donor, you don't know who the recipient is. The recipient does not know who the donor is. That's the
right.
invisibility or anonymity that you're talking about. And
And that's what Ricky
there are
is
13
talking about.
stages
Yes.
in the way that Maimonides refers to it. If I may, Marty, I just picking up on what Michael was talking about in Israel specifically, but there is a difference in Jewish law between the moral code that applies in war and the moral code that applies ben adam l'chavero, between in society, if you will. And sometimes, and the premise is that sometimes we're forced into making some of these decisions that challenge our moral code. Okay. And so there's a published, for the Israeli Defense Forces, which I think is what Michael was referring to. There's a published code that if we anticipate such and such a scenario, we are telling you how you should act according to the code of the Israeli Defense Forces. But that may be acknowledging that may be different than your own personal code of personal behavior in a non-wartime situation.
Right. In militarily speaking, it has to be different than your everyday civil law.
Right.
It's a given. Don, you had mentioned the word justice, and I think that this is very important. Here, we're trying to create a just society. The first 10 rules, if you will, are for the individual. And now we're going to branch out into how a society should behave. Okay, so I think that what you said was very important. Ricky had her hand up first on, and then I know I mentioned it, but let her.
Getting back to what Norm just said, is that I thought that the highest form of tzedakah was
Yes.
tending to a dead body because the person couldn't repay you.
That's not in the same list that we're referring to.
Oh,
That's
okay.
that's not a Maimonides thing.
Oh, okay. You were sticking to Maimonides.
Okay. Yes, Don.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really exposed this issue of anonymity and justice is the internet, because on the
Very
internet,
good.
you can be totally anonymous, and then you can troll people without revealing who you are, and it's driven kids to suicide. I mean, it's that serious. We're anonymous attacks.
Yeah.
Equivalent to the ring of Geigy, really.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's a really serious issue.
That's right. So now I wish I had read this before we started last week in this discussion, but I think it's a very important thing. Anonymity can be used two ways, for good and for evil. Okay, I think that's what our consensus is. And so with that, now with that understanding, let's also, yes, Ricky.
A real quick one-liner. A coincidence is God's way of working anonymously.
Okay.
We call that a godcidence in our church.
Okay, so I'm going to ask, we are on verse 7. Is that right? Exodus 21, verse 7.
We got to 8 or 9, but.
Oh, we did? Okay.
Well, you can start with 7.
Okay.
21?
Okay.
What chapter?
It's
21.
Exodus
21,
21, verse 7. And we'll be going back a little bit, but yeah, these were very important, I think, discussions. Thank you, Michael, for bringing up yours too. Okay, who would like to read?
I could begin the reading.
Okay.
And if a man should sell his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as the men servants do. Ah, those were the days. If she please not her master, who hath espoused her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed to sell her unto a foreign people. He shall have no power, seeing he hath dealt deceitfully with her. And if he espouse her unto his son, he shall deal with her after the manner of daughters. If he takes him another wife, her food, her raiment, and her conjugal rights, she shall not diminish. And if he shall do not these three unto her, then she shall go out for nothing without money.
Okay. Okay. Some of us have easier English to read in our texts. And when you deal with some of the older texts, you run into some of the difficulty. And if there was any difficulty in understanding, if somebody has another reading, Ricky, do you have one?
I do. Yeah.
Why don't you read the same paragraph again?
Sure. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not be freed as male slaves are. If she proves to be displeasing to her master, who designated her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He shall not have the right to sell her to outsiders, since he broke faith with her. And if he designated her for his son, he shall deal with her as is the practice with free maidens. If he marries another, he must not withhold from this one her food, her clothing, or her conjugal rights. If he fails her in these three ways, she shall go free without payment.
Okay, it's I thought that would be easier for us to follow. So what do you think about this? Well, obviously we don't like to do this, but we recognize there is still a slave practice in the world, in the whole world. It has not stopped like we think it has. So that's one. And so at the time within which this was written, this was common practice. Okay, so that's one thing. Any comments about verse 7? When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not be freed as male slaves are. Yes, Don.
This relates to verse 7, but also to the entire chapter, I think. Last week, we had justified complaints from the women in the Torah study that there was no gender equality to be seen here. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized these are the commands of God. And what we're seeing here is the very origins of misogyny and gender inequality throughout the entire Western and Mideastern world to this day. These are the commands of God.
Excuse me, this is not the origin. It is a recognition that slavery exists.
But slavery in particular to women, because in Christianity, it's referred back to what they call the Old Testament. In Islam, Muhammad studied under Jewish scholars, and the Quran gives us the inequality of women. It's extreme with the wearing of the burqa right now. But everything all gender inequality can be traced back to what we're reading right now. And so, how do we deal with that?
Isn't it nice that you didn't have to pay a dowry?
How do you know that?
No, but this is the same thing. This is property.
Exactly.
You're dealing with property.
Exactly.
But it's a new way of looking at property. And that's what this entire segment in Torah is about, not just this one line.
No, I appreciate that.
And it's great that we live in an age, I agree with you, we live in an age today in which we'd like to prohibit slavery. But believe it or not, it still exists big time around the world.
No, I get that.
That was my opening comment.
Yeah, but my point was that we as Jews are looking at the origins of that in the commandments of God that radiates out everywhere.
No, it already exists in the world. Slavery already precedes this.
But this codifies.
Don is talking about
It
misogyny.
codifies the behavior that you have to follow if you have slaves.
But it's still a command of God. It's like it codifies the fact that women are inferior and that slaves are legitimate.
At that time in history, women were property. So it's property rights. It's a discussion of property rights.
God is God. God could have changed all that, but he didn't.
He does change it, as you pointed out with your opening statement. Rabbis, what are your takes on what Don says?
I'm fascinated listening. And there is a different tack on it. Just to not to muddy the waters anymore, but the approach can be, and some of the feminist commentators do take a look at this and say that in some ways this can be seen not just as giving what we would say giving a hechsher, giving the imprimatur, giving validity to what was already seemed to be the human practices, but what God seems to be doing, or what Jewish tradition seems to be doing, is adding a few loopholes, adding a few possible disclaimers. Okay, so that, well, if a man has been forced to sell his daughter because he's so impoverished that this is the only way he can guarantee her being taken care of, as opposed to, oh, this is an arrogant man who sells his daughter off to slavery. There are different ways of looking at the experience, and then, this makes a little more sense if we look at it that way. And since none of us were eyewitness, we don't know exactly what the situations were. But like Marty, like what you were saying, and then I think Don also introducing the word justice here, it's how can you find out of some of these practices that were already known and accepted in the ancient world, how can we add a layer of a step towards justice and understanding and change that takes a long time?
Good point. And it unfortunately did take a long time.
Still changing.
Yeah. Yes, Suzanne.
I can't help but think that a lot of this ties back to Genesis. Part of Eve's punishment was that I forget which chapter and verse, but God said something about men shall rule over women. But when Eve was first created, there wasn't any, I don't remember anything where God put Eve below Adam. They seem to have been equal. And then after eating the forbidden fruit, then things changed. So for God not to contradict himself, I think that the way these laws were written are in keeping with what he said back in Genesis. I mean, maybe,
Okay.
but I mean, that's how I see
Okay.
it.
Good point. Yes, Ricky.
But there's the two creation stories. One, man and woman, he created them. So they're equal. But the other one is she is taken, as a part of, rib out of his side and to be his servant. So that which creation story is.
Ricky, I don't see it as two creation stories. I just,
all right. But
I mean, I get that you do, but I'm saying I personally don't.
But so which aspect of the story do you go by? Man and woman, he created them, where they're equal, or where she comes later, so anyway, let's just throw that out. That there's
Okay.
parts to
Pastor
that.
Bruce, you're muted.
You're muted.
You're muted.
Muted.
I did that on purpose because I had to get up and leave for a minute. Sorry about that. As Susan said what she said, though, I started kind of thinking about what we're really talking about here is, men, daughters, slavery, difficulties in a sense with all these relationships. And so I was thinking, as you look through just this little section of scripture that we've read, it does sort of go back to Genesis. If you ask me, I would say that all these little, Rabbi was saying, hey, there's some little loopholes or some little ideas that we can maybe use to kind of help correct this as it goes along. I think that's true. But if you go backwards to the fact of why is this the way it is, it has to be because, to me, it's because we have sin in our lives, and these are all things that have to do with that. And now we're trying to correct it. We're trying to correct it by giving some ideas of how to change. And it does take a long time to change. And again, we still have slavery today. The worst slavery we have today, of course, is all the human trafficking and sex slavery that we see all over the place, including in Arizona. And it's horrible. And hopefully we're all trying to do something about it by helping those that are trying to help those that are coming out of it. I mean, that's one thing I can say. Our church is helping a group of people to try to help people get out of this stuff. And so there's that part of it. But to me, it all goes back to the invisible, the cloak, the ring.
That's right.
All this stuff is exactly what you're talking about at the beginning, Marty, because, people can, somehow get into somebody's life and steal them away from someone and sell them off here and do all these things. And that's horrible. Everything about what's going on right now is as horrible as what we just read here, if not more horrible in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just saying that it continues to go on, and yet I see what Rabbi's saying about, hey, let's get some things in here that it's going to change from the beginning, what we need to do and how it can be. And change is slow, but boy, I tell you that sin right now is every bit as prevalent as it was in this chapter.
Yes, yeah. Yes,
I
Rabbi
mean, every
Mary.
bit, if not worse.
Yes, Rabbi Mary.
Well, my philosophy about all the laws that we saw and we're going to see were created not so much as the loopholes, in this case, as Reb Norman was pointing out, which is, of course, it was a culture that did this and this and this and this. Now, the laws came because it was done.
Right.
If people, you know, when people drive from this side to this side, if they would have been nice and stop and that, you don't need the traffic lights. So every law that it's created is because of a situation that it's not happening. Unfortunately, as Pastor Bruce said, you know, things continue. And I think that what the laws do is accelerate the pace of the change.
Right.
Because if we sit and wait until people are nice and stop, it will take a long time. So, Pastor Bruce, I don't know what we can do as far as creating a legal system or laws to stop the trafficking now. The only thing we can do is, you know, catch these people and then, you know, punish them. But they're not following any morality, as we mentioned, any ethical behavior.
They're not. And there are places that I know about. And if you're interested, you can always talk to me about it. But there are places that are bringing people, the girls, out of this and helping them to get a new life. And that's where our church is supporting those people coming out. We don't have the prosecution. We're not prosecuting. We don't lock people up in jail. That's not what we do. But for the people who've been abused, for the people who've come out of it, that's where we can be helpful in this case. And that's what I was trying to say was that, yeah, the laws are made, but we need to make sure that those people that are breaking the law, if we see something, if we do something, report it. My heavens, there's times when you think, gee, are those 3 kids in the back that belong to that guy? You know, I kind of wonder sometimes, you know, I can't even think in my head, gee, that doesn't look right. Well, if it doesn't look right, maybe it isn't right. Maybe I should report the license plate and let somebody else decide what to do with it. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there's just
right. I understand.
There's just stuff out there, and you know, we are called to do what we can do. And in our case, we can't prosecute, we can't throw people in jail, but we can certainly help the poor women and especially girls that are coming out of this stuff.
That's right.
And how horrible of a life they've had to experience up to this point. And there are places of which you can contribute money or contribute, as we do, clothing or, you know, other kinds of things to those situations. And I guess it just reminded me of all this stuff with this kind of stuff that we're talking about in just these few verses. It's amazing that stuff is still going on right now that's horrible like this. And you're right, it shouldn't be, but it still is. And I just wanted to bring that up, that there are things you can do, you know, and help.
Thank you. Yes, Ricky.
Well, pick up on Mary's point. She said that our laws are for punishment, but also for hopefully deterring. And, you know, so, I mean, by making it the cost of doing something immoral so high, other people will think about it and maybe not, and that might bring change. I mean, it's
what you bring up is very important.
Yeah, the deterrent.
Because a lot of people will change their behavior if they know that there's some sort of punishment, whether it's being shunned or if it's going to jail or things like that. They won't do it. But is it still okay to do it if nobody's looking? That was the original question. Yes, Don.
Well, coming back to the original question, it seems to me, Mari, that there's, in some people, there's a sense of guilt or at least a sense of unease resulting from what they do.
Mm-hmm.
But we also know that other people have absolutely no sense of guilt. And those, you know, and those are the psychopaths,
sociopaths, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They almost relish causing harm and hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's no way, I mean, the purpose of law is really to address the psychopaths and sociopaths because they don't respond to eternal feelings.
There are always going to be people like that. That's right. So, but there can be other reasons why.
Oh,
We have law over the years, man has created a whole bunch of extra laws on top of this list, and the list we will go through. As different events occur, they have to modify the law. And I think we find that out with God too, as you pointed out with the daughters, the story of the daughters. Yes, I don't know which of the rabbis had their hand up first. So go ahead. I'll let you guys decide.
Miri, bevakasha.
Oh, let's fight it. Let's fight it.
Yeah.
Well, I just one thing that I want to mention, and Rabbi Norman can incorporate that with what he wants to say. In not Judaism, I don't want to call it Judaism because we are not talking about that now. But in the laws that we see in the Torah and the laws that come in the Talmud, witnesses are very important in accepting or not accepting. So if they are not witnesses and something happened, I'll tell you an example later on, then things are not exactly as we are talking about. If someone, whatever, I can come to examples, but the issue of witnesses is a very important thing, in particularly not just one witness, but at least two. So we can discuss that.
Yeah, I think the story of Solomon with the baby, whose child is it, comes to mind. There are no witnesses, both women. He has a novel idea, okay, as to how to try to solve this issue. And fortunately, it turns out for the good.
He's ready to cut through. He's cut through to the truth, right? Okay.
Yeah, the good way of putting it.
Anyway, what I did want to say is we need to remember that most scholars agree that any of the laws or the mishpatim that are going to be listed here, as opposed to the generic 10 commandments that we were talking about before, these all are case law. This is not hypothetical. This particular situation happened. This father questioned what he could do, should do, must do vis-a-vis his daughter. And then when such and such a case happened about the daughter whose new master didn't want, whatever, it was all put into case law as opposed to merely theoretical and hypothetical.
Okay. Yes, Michael. Then I'll ask. Oh, wait a minute, Michael. Ruthann had her hand up long ago.
No, Michael can go first.
Okay.
Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, in reference to what you said about modification, modifying the law, and changing or adding or whatever, I would just go back to also the 10 Commandments, and there's nothing clear cut, and including I was just moments ago I was thinking about first-degree murder, and I think that there's even a case to be made for that. For example, there was a plan to assassinate Adolf Hitler. That would have been first-degree murder because it's forethought. But then you would, why? So in certain circumstances, there's so much in life that there are extenuating circumstances and exceptions to the rule in so many areas of life, But even though the 10 Commandments, God laid that, and you got to follow these, they still have to be adjusted somehow it's in certain circumstances. That's all I would say.
Good point. Yes, Ruthann.
Okay, I was just going to say, and I'll go back to the same thing I've been saying for 5 years now, that the Torah and most of the laws and stuff that we have in society are really designed to change the behavior of men, not women, men. I mean, you don't see in the Torah things
point.
that pertain to women's behavior. And even nowadays, you know, in modern times, it's because the fact that you have more and more women in prison and stuff, I mean, except for drugs, which is something altogether different, I feel, but it's because women, in order to try for equality, are becoming more like men, which is causing problems, okay? Whereas civilization is trying to make men more like women. I mean, if I still say if women ran the world, things would be quite different than it is now.
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
Very good.
Wow.
Okay, Ricky,
Yeah, I didn't pick up on that point. I attended a seminar once in blah, blah, blah. It was all women. But the same guy also led a group that was all men. It was a weekend retreat. And he told us that when the men met, there was always a fight for who would be the alpha male, who would be top dog. But when our group, the women, met, we formed a community. We made a circle and introduced ourselves to each other. And we're not, you know, so it was so totally, totally different. And it was a large group, like 200 people in each. And the men had to fight it out to be the strong guy, and the women made the community.
I mean, like Pastor Bruce, if you could change men's behavior, okay, you wouldn't have sex slaves today.
Arrest the Johns, yes.
You know, I mean, that's, you know, change the behavior of men and you'll change society totally.
I would have a tendency to really agree with that, Ruth Ann. And you know, I think that, yeah, there's not a lot of, there may be women accomplices with some of these people.
Sure.
But as far as who's heading it up and I have never heard of a woman leading a sex sting operation.
I mean, yes,
operation.
Just
there's always going to be
that's all.
exceptions. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there are brothel houses that are run by women.
Yeah.
Yes, they're run by women, but if the men didn't think of their quote unquote needs, you wouldn't have the brothel houses.
That's correct.
That's
absolutely correct. So the madam would not have a job.
Exactly.
So-
She'd have to find something else
So
to do.
basically what I hear is that these are rules to control behavior
of men.
of
Men.
Men.
Of men. That's your consensus. Okay. Don, yes. You've had your hand up for a while.
I think this discussion argument fails in this day of modern day of more tolerance because we live in a world of LGBTQ. And so are you saying that the world would be different if these rules were developed by queers or transgenders or you know, it isn't men and women anymore. Because 8% of the world are not strictly men or women. So I don't think that argument holds water.
Did you say 8%?
8%.
The number 8?
8.
Of the world. He said 8% of the world.
It still comes down to what you're talking about is sexuality. I mean, this is the one thing that I really hate. And like, I'm just talking about in BSTC, okay? We have a couple of members who are not, whatever, they're not heterosexual, okay? And some of them like to throw that into your face. And I'm saying, we treat them no different than anybody else. So forget the sexuality. I mean, I think that's the part of the problem here. Again, it comes down to the same thing, that men want to treat different people's sexuality as a problem. Whereas if you throw out sexuality and just treat them like people, what's the difference? I mean, I used to play mahjong with a group, 2 ladies that are married together. I don't care about that. It made no difference to me. I still went over there and played mahjong. Okay, there's a whole group of us did. You just have to treat people as people and get rid of all this sexuality, and then you won't have the problems you have. It has nothing to do whether you're whatever.
One of the issues here is a little different. If we go back to the text,
Marty,
yes,
Marty, excuse me. I need to make a statement about all this discussion, and
Sure.
you might disagree with me. We are in a generation and in a culture that, guys, is so different than what we are reading now. And in my mind, judging what happened there with our parameters of seeing the world, it's a bit tricky. It's a bit tricky because, you know, the rules, the laws, the morality and the ethical behavior, and men and women and whatever goes, it's not with our culture judging something that's completely separated. We can mention that, but it's very tricky, and it's very, I don't know. I tend to accept what's written, not because it's a beautiful story or whatever, but because it's what it is, and not because I think that the allowance for women to vote happened only in, am I right, 79? So, you know, we cannot go there and judge what's going on in our Torah. Sorry, my personal view.
But what I took away from what we were reading is there's more to it. If you do practice slavery, you still have to treat them as human beings. And in the context of Torah, the human beings are considered children of God. Okay? And we're going to also talk about humane behavior. The animals are created by God. And so there are ways in which the animals will be treated, and so forth. So there are consequences if you do have a slave. And the consequences are, if a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not be freed. Whoever owns that slave now has a duty to treat her in a different manner. Okay?
Yeah,
So
that comes up by the end of the paragraph, that he has to.
it builds up to that.
Yeah,
it builds up to that. And if she proves to be displeasing, let's say she doesn't want to do anything, okay? He doesn't want to become this, to fulfill the sexual pleasures or things like that. He still has to let her be redeemed, but he cannot have any monetary gain.
Right.
Okay. In other words, if you choose to use your slave in a certain manner, you are no longer, you can't do anything you want to that person. By the way, I brought up the movie The Price of Sugar. It is a Dutch title, and it did not, it's different from The Price of Sugar movie that was with other American actors. It was a Dutch movie, and it made the rounds in at the Jewish film festivals. And in that movie, the fellow who owns slaves treats them horribly. The women who are married to the slave owner, they want to see a change in that slave owner's behavior. In the end, justice is served. The slave owner loses everything, and the women take care of the female slaves and move out. Okay, so this is not an unusual discussion. It's been made into a movie to stimulate this discussion. Rabbi Roman, oh, okay, so you just moved over. Okay, yes. You moved over on my screen.
Pastor Bruce had to leave.
Had to go.
Yeah, right.
Yes, he mentioned that.
That shifted
his
me,
note.
I don't know, to the left, to the center, whichever. But we need to, or the following needs to be said every single time we have this discussion.
Yes.
And I'm saying it on behalf of thousands of generations of rabbis. Okay. And that's that the underlying principle is, remember that you yourself were a slave.
Yes.
In the land of Egypt. Okay. Always remember what it felt like, what you felt like when you were in this position. And when you make your determination about how you're going to treat your slaves or your slave's son or daughter or whatever it is, the underlying statement, it's not here as a concluding statement of the paragraph, but it is some 36, 37 other times in the Torah. Remember that you yourself were a slave.
That's right.
And remember how you felt. Therefore, when you make your determination about how you're going to act justly or, and morally, righteously, always remember that.
And that's why I find it interesting that it starts out with a discussion about slavery.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't start out with man and society.
That's the frame of reference.
That's right.
By which everything else will be measured.
So it becomes a very important way of remembering. This is part of the cycle, the different parts. And yes, Franz Rosenzweig, thank you, Rabbi. I've been reading this book. It's very tedious, but it is very, very important to the way you put things. Yes. So if we read the next, it says, if he broke faith with her, the female slave, he is going to lose the financial compensation. If he marries another, he still has to look after the original slave. Okay, and he cannot, and it tells him specifically he can't withhold certain basic rights, certain basic needs from that female, whether it's food, clothing, or conjugational rights. I don't know if they meant all three or one at a time.
When it gets applied to the laws of marriage,
right?
It does mean all three.
All three.
But we could get into a whole discussion as to whether marriage is slavery or not. But that's besides the point.
Well, it depends on how you treat your wife. Yes.
I mean, and clearly the answer from Jewish perspective is that it's not. Clearly.
Yes.
Okay.
And if a man does, the woman has even more reason that she can obtain a get.
Well, she can try to obtain a get.
Try to, yes.
But happy wife, happy life. Come on.
That's true. But if he fails her in these 3 ways, she shall go free. I mean, these are tremendous. So they're made. These rules are made to cause anyone who is going to undertake this type of, and I hate to use the term business, but it is, then he's got to think twice about his own behavior, or there are going to be consequences for the bad behavior. Okay. Yes, Rabbi Mary.
I just want to go back to Exodus to look at something that's a bit different, but we can do some kind of parallelism. It's the maidens that our wives took because they were barren or whatever the reason. So we have Hagar, for example, and we have not Leah, but we have Leah too. The maiden that Rachel took was Bilhah and
Zilpah.
And Zilpah. And their children are treated just like the children of the real wives. So we have even that in the issue of maidens that are not the official wife, they don't talk about it, but we can talk about it.
Yeah.
And actually in the prayers in many Reform congregations, we said, Sarah, Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, and Zilpah. So, it's that connection between maiden and slave.
Yes. Good point. Good point. So if someone would be kind to read verses 12 and 13.
Okay, I can read it.
Please, David, yes.
Okay,
Verse 12.
verse 12. We'll start with verse 12.
And 13.
Okay, he that smiteth a man so that he dieth shall surely be put to death. And if a man lie not in wait, but God cause it to come to hand, then I will appoint thee a place whither he may flee.
Okay, so that comes later. Sanctuary cities. But what are so this is what Michael describes as separating and making a distinction between murder and killing something.
To kill,
Yeah.
to murder, and to kill.
To kill. That's right. And you mention this very often, but it's important. It's very important. And what is your take on this as it's written here?
Well, it between 12 and 13, it really describes. But when he says by design,
Right.
that's premeditated.
That's right.
By design. If one kills in self-defense, defending another person, which is done all the time by police officers, it's permitted, because unless you're a pacifist, when most of the people are not, but it's about preserving life, actually, innocent life.
Okay.
It's the preservation of innocent life. And
So I wish Michael Mussman was here as a lawyer. He would be talking about justifiable homicide.
Well, that's what the killing and self-defense is.
Exactly.
That's a justifiable homicide.
Exactly. And it also, so any other thoughts about this? Yes, okay. Rabbi Norman and Don.
Yeah, I'll just will point out that again with the Hebrew, the verb in Hebrew, lahakot, um, usually has the understanding that this is something done not necessarily with deliberation or predetermined, but out of emotion, out of anger.
Right.
Okay, it's the same
Crime of
verb
passion.
when Moses strikes the rock. Okay, that
Right.
it's done with a certain amount of devoted energy, rather not necessarily premeditated thought. That's the verb that's used here.
Another example is the story involving Pinchas. Immediately because two people are having sex within the temple, the entryway of the temple, he slays them. But God says, wait a minute, he's not to be put to death, and goes through a whole, but that'll come later. We'll have a great discussion about that later. Yes,
And
Don.
I don't,
Let me let Don have a say.
So going to the rabbis again for this one, but it doesn't say in the text who the executioner shall be. And as I understand it, that at the time, if someone's killed, if they're outside the tribe, then the family was approved for taking revenge. And there were different rules for if the killing took place inside the tribe. So I'm wondering that in this case, how does the commandment apply to that?
Okay, Rabbi first. Michael, just hold on. Let the Rabbi respond to this question, and then
the
you
assumption
go.
the assumption is that there was a trial. Doesn't say that here, but Talmud in following up would presume that there is a trial, and as Rabbi Miri was talking about earlier, there had to be at least two witnesses to verify. And that didn't matter whether it was a Hebrew or from some other people. Okay, but yes, there was the recognition that a family could take vengeance, and to protect someone who had been acquitted in the trial, but the family was still coming after them. That was the purpose of the city of refuge.
Okay,
Right.
thank you for that.
Michael, you wanted to.
you're not permitted to strike out in anger. I think that's when Moses struck the rock, and then he was not permitted to enter the land of Israel, I think.
Right.
Yes, but also the episode before he becomes a leader, he has an encounter with an interaction between the Pharaoh's soldiers.
Well, the taskmaster. Right. Mm-hmm.
That's right. And he kills the taskmaster. So you can see how the stories interrelate here. David, did you have your hand up?
No,
Oh, okay.
oh, sorry.
Okay. And so as it says in verse 14, when a man schemes against another and kills him treacherously, you shall take him from my very altar. I assume that would mean banish him from the community, and he should be put to death because it was murder, as we've defined murder.
No, from the very altar actually means literally from seeking sanctuary, holding
sanctuary.
on to the horns of the ark and whatever.
Yeah, this scheming would be premeditation.
Right, that's what we're discussing.
Yes.
So he can't claim the the holiness to protect him. The holy altar for protection. Is that what you mean? Or Torah or things like that, Rabbi?
Literally claiming sanctuary. We use
Claiming
the phrase that we use
sanctuary.
that phrase today.
Okay. Okay, and what about,
Marty,
yes, yes,
just one
Rabbi Marie.
comment. And it's interesting because I just finished a book in which two young men fight and one falls back and hit his head and dies. So that it's described here as Elohim is doing that cause. I mean, it's not about the fight that Elohim is doing it, but Elohim takes the consequence that it's not something that it was in the human, but Elohim made it happen. I think it's a very beautiful way of putting it.
Well, if it's mutual combat, then
What?
if it's a fight, mutual combat, and one dies, it's, I don't think anyone would be, there's no responsibility for the other if it was mutual combat.
But it could be, as I tell you, the story here is two young men are combating, they are fighting, but one falls and hit himself on a rock. It did not die from a punch. So that Elohim wanted that.
Okay, yes, Rabbi.
I think, although he's not here to validate it, but I think that's what Pastor Bruce meant in his community, where they say a godsident, as opposed to an accident, but a godsident. Now, if I may, and I'm just to share an anecdote, and I say it with true love and respect, but it fits in here, okay, to this conversation. So earlier, I forget if it was Marty or Ruth Ann, Helene Fields, I'm going to bring it back to her. Her son was supposed to have a liver transplant yesterday morning. And she had asked those of us who are close with her to send some prayers on his behalf and whatever. So when I checked with her this morning, how did the surgery go? I couldn't do it yesterday because I was driving to Los Angeles, and I hate the traffic in Los Angeles, and the traffic, I was too distracted. So I called her this morning. How did the surgery go? And this is a true anecdote. It'll tell you something about Helene, but it fits into what we're saying, I think. She said, well, they had to postpone the surgery for her son because at the last minute, the doctors determined that the liver was not a good match, and it would have conceivably have fatal consequences.
Sure.
Okay. So I said to her, well, I'm sorry that happened. We all join in our prayers that that an appropriate match will be found soon, and that he'll have the surgery and recovery. And she said, yes, and I thank everybody for their prayers leading up to yesterday's experience. And I said, oh, you're very welcome. We care about you. We care about your son. And she said, yes, the prayers were successful. And I'm saying, wait a minute, he didn't have the surgery. He's still very ill. And she's saying that the prayers yesterday were successful. What do you mean? And she said, well, they were successful in causing that God caused the doctors, gave the doctors the wisdom to know not to transplant that unworthy liver. That's her approach to how God is involved in every one of these decisions. Intentionally, unintentionally, godsident, whatever you want to say. And I say it in her name as a teaching and statement of faith. Those of you who know Helene, she's always optimistic and always faithful.
Yes. Very, very, very good. That's why I strongly recommended her book a few weeks ago.
Yeah, definitely.
For the same reason, it's excellent. Thank you, Rabbi. any other comments? Because yes,
Yeah, I am going to have to make excuses. As you can tell, I'm in a different space.
yes,
I'm I'm in the dining room of my son and daughter-in-law's home,
okay,
and they're anxious to start preparing lunch. So
okay,
um, I'm gonna have to beg off in a few minutes. Yeah,
okay.
but okay.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Can you tell them, please, Rabbi Norman, that I love the paintings behind you? That I
I will
believe
tell
they
them that
are
they have some
Klein and
very
yes.
interesting art around here. Right.
Actually, that dovetails into our discussion. Most of these rules that we're reading are black and white.
Oh, okay.
No, but really, we have brought in shades of
Right.
gray.
Sure.
And but it's interesting how it has gone from black and white to everything in between. And that is the purpose of trying to seek proper justice. Okay, so there may be some mitigating circumstances. And so what starts out as black and white over time, as I say, maybe Ansel Adams had something to do with this. Okay.
50 Shades of Gray. 50 Shades of Gray.
So anyway, but I think it becomes important because we're going to read about very serious consequences for lots of things.
Yeah.
Lots of things. But I think it's very fortunate that those who have come before us have thought about this in great depth. What about this? What about that? And without that questioning, we would have a very harsh judicial system. And I think that's where we have come to this day. And we're very fortunate that the law has taken into account over time. And that is also set, as Don pointed out earlier, there are other mitigating circumstances that have to be taken into consideration. And so it becomes I think, a very important thing. What time? Yeah, we still have plenty of time.
Okay.
Yes.
With leading up into the next several sentences when we talk about parental relationships,
Yeah.
I'm going to excuse myself. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, Rabbi.
So if somebody will read verses 15 through 17.
Yeah, I will. He who strikes his father or his mother shall be put to death. He who kidnaps a man, whether he has sold him or is still holding him, shall be put to death. He who insults his father or his mother shall be put to death. And let's see, the note on insults I got, or reviles. He who reviles.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
so. What is your take on this? Verses 15 through 17.
Well, it's harsh, but I mean, well, mother, father, or a man, no women here, you do something to against another human. I'll try to make it more general. In a negative way, kidnapping, insults, strikes, you're going to be put to death. But again, that's a very, very harsh punishment. Strike your father or mother and you're going to be put to death. I mean, that's quite harsh.
Well, you're violating one of the
honor of the mother and father. Exactly. Yes. I don't know why he who kidnaps a man got stuck between the two, between 15 and 17.
Why do you think that would happen?
Whether he has sold him or is still holding him. I haven't, let's see. On my purpose. Okay, the primary purpose of kidnapping was to enslave the victim. But again, enslaving is in a different categories than not honoring one's mother and father. So that's why I don't understand why that's put between the other two.
What happens when you kidnap someone? Or let's say somebody comes and kidnaps one of your children.
You're stealing their freedom.
Okay, so why is that so important?
Well, you're gonna you
It
make a
hurts
slave out of them.
Well, it hurts the mother and father to lose the child.
That's
the
right.
only connection I can make with the mother and father.
And that grieving,
Right.
it's hard to imagine what someone would feel like if their child died or if their child was kidnapped.
Yeah.
It's like killing the soul of the parents.
I think that's what Pastor Bruce is talking about with the people that he is helping.
That's right.
Exactly.
So I just want to say, okay, Don, I'm going to hold off. Is that Wendy's hand?
Yes, that's Wendy's hand.
Okay.
You know, everybody's
Hey, you're breaking up. You're breaking up.
where's your thing? Everybody's talking about the kidnapping and how it affects the parents. But how does it affect the child?
Exactly.
Definitely too.
That's my scare when we hear about those kidnappings today is, oh my goodness, what is that child going through?
That's right.
So that's the scary part.
I agree with you because it is important to remember you're also killing, even if the child is alive, you're still killing the soul of the child.
That's why the Amber Alerts. And there was this one young gal, there were a couple of gals a few years ago, and one that had been held for years, and one finally broke free, and the news followed her for quite a while, how she reacclimated. And then the Utah girl also, the Mormon girl, there have been cases where young girls have been enslaved for a period of time. And then finally managed to be found or get themselves free.
You know,
And
like the girl who chewed through her binds, and ran away, was able to run away as a result. I mean, that took a lot of courage.
Right.
Of courage. Yes, Don.
I'd like to know the Hebrew here because the text I'm reading is specific that if you kidnap a man, then it's punishable by death. But we know that at the time women are property, and when we say children, it doesn't necessarily apply to children, at least not both sexes. So I wonder, is the Hebrew strictly applied to kidnapping a man here, or if you kidnap a female, is that punishable by death as well?
I think it's strictly a man.
I would interpret it the same way, Ricky. Yes.
What is the Hebrew say?
No, they say the father and the mother.
Huh?
No, if the kidnapped person, does it say whether it has to be male or female?
Okay. It says ish, which is zachar, which is male.
Right.
Okay.
So
Yes.
so it isn't, you're not put to death if you kidnap
A woman.
a woman or a female child. It has to be a male.
Okay.
It's a good point because before they talk about the woman slave and the mother, but here it says just men.
Yeah.
A man.
So we're back to property rights.
Yeah. That's how, by the way, that is the basic foundation of law. Dealing is with property rights. Okay. And at the time this comes down, that is how women were treated. as property. And as I always say, I'm very happy I live today and not then, having had two daughters. Okay, but now it's very interesting. Why about striking his father or mother shall be put to death? So it's kidnapping, striking a father or mother. It's dealing with parents.
Insults are reviling,
Yes,
not showing
that
respect.
too. That too.
Yeah.
So this is a passage that deals with honoring your parents.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But these are things that are not ways in which people may think it's okay, but it's not. Okay. Yes, Rabbi Mary.
Well, I think again we have to think about the terms of that time, and not long time ago. Here it says if the child beats the mother or the father and creates a bruise,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that you can see that the parents got a smash. Now it's not just the pain of that. You have also the issue of your name. What kind of child do you have?
Yes.
And we're going to get it later on, that basically you have to stone him. But it's the issue of respect, it's the issue of shame, it's the issue of your reputation. So
Right.
it's on top of that because it can be seen.
Okay. I'm surprised nobody has spoken about fear of the consequence and how that helps restrain the behavior
That's
of.
that we said before, punishment and deterrence.
Right.
Deterrence. But a real quickie, funny, I did a lot of traveling in my RV, and I spent 1 year, quite a bit of time in Pennsylvania and Ohio, in Amish Mennonite country. Okay, get a gift for somebody, and I found in a gift shop, very Mennonite or Amish or whatever, a thing that you put on the wall, which I gave to a friend of mine who was a mother of 4 kids. And it said, that honor thy mother and father thing, I meant it.
Okay. Oh, golly.
And that's right there. She put it right up in the kitchen, that every time you go out of the kitchen, I meant it.
Okay. Any other comments about this?
Oops.
By the way, Grace, I want 2 things. One, the photograph of your puppy is really great. Okay. And how's your sugar doing?
Well, I've had a really interesting week. I upgraded my insulin pump not too long ago, and then this week I had some insulin that had been degraded over time.
Oh boy.
So I was sick all of Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday, and then Thursday I got a refill of prescription for my insulin. So it's getting better. It just takes time to overcome that. So I was just borderline in acidosis. So now I'm starting to drift back to almost normal, if I knew what normal felt like. And that puppy is she's a 10-week-old standard poodle. And I'm waiting for the litter to be distributed, and then I'm going to get one of them, what's left. So I've been over to the property to meet the breeder and the parents and the puppies, and it's been a fun experience. That's my next diabetic alert dog, because I need something that doesn't shed and, you know, my mother will not be allergic to. And so I thought, standard poodle will do it. And she's beautiful. She's really, that one has the best focus of 8 that I've seen. And I've been around. It's a lot of fun being mauled by all these puppies, let me tell you.
Okay, because the reason I said it, I noticed it may be the topic of discussion, but it's not the usual you. Would you check your blood sugar?
I know what it is, I can tell you.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to tell me, but just be sure it's okay.
It's 117. So
Okay, it's not too bad for a diabetic.
yeah.
Okay. Very good. Okay. Any other discussion? I'm sorry I digressed, but I was just concerned. That's all.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The other thing is that any other comments about kidnapping and striking and murder?
No, there wasn't murder here. It was just insults and striking.
And insults. But
Yeah,
does
it doesn't
that,
have murder in these 3 sentences.
when you make your parents feel bad, what are you doing?
Disrespecting them.
You're disrespecting, but that can also be, that's a kind word. How do the parents feel as a result? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like shit.
Yeah. And so this is a form of murder, if you will. You're going to remove their spunk, if you will.
It all goes to the original saying that honor thy father and mother.
Yes.
It's God, God said honor. So anything that dishonors them is you can't do.
Very good. Very good. So yes, Don.
Yeah, it seems there's a deeper layer here though, because a curse, it's words. It's no physical. It's physical assault, and so the parents would have to be willing to see their child die for having uttered some words, and to me that's astounding. And secondly, I'm wondering if it's been midrash that there have to be 3 witnesses to a verbal assault as well as. I mean, there's no bodies. There's no. There's no.
That's right.
And so is it just the parents who go to the rabbi and said, our son just insulted us, kill him, or do?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, they do.
They do.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's why it comes to stoning. The death is by stoning. Yes. But it never was done because all kind of reasons. But yeah, they talk about, these days with the rabbis. And if you are an Orthodox and the rabbi tells you ABC, you follow. If you are a Reform and the rabbi said ABC, okay, I'll get another opinion, another rabbi.
I want D, E, and F.
So they can go to the rabbi and say, okay, our son just insulted us, so we want you to kill him because we can always make another one who maybe won't. It's kind of drastic.
Okay, David, is that Wendy again?
Yes, Wendy.
Please, Wendy. Wendy, could you move closer to the microphone?
Is this better?
No.
It's better.
I don't know where the microphone is.
It's still far away. You're breaking up.
David, where's the microphone?
Right down. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to hear it.
You're muffling.
What got me was if a child beats a parent or a mother, I don't remember if it was male or female, but the bruise cannot be seen. Well, that's okay then. I mean, unless they're going to take their clothes down and say, look where they've hit me or bruised me, the kid gets to walk free and he knows he can now hit his parents anytime he wants. So that was the one that got to me.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good point. Good point. Any other comments about this this group of, we sort of lumped them together for discussing the parents. It really is not about the child. It's about the parents, what they're going through. That's how I look at it. But I think it's very, unfortunately, as we said before, black and white. We can all think of other circumstances that may have occurred. We don't know.
One thing we haven't discussed that I know of the discussion is about honoring your parents after they have gone, you know?
Oh,
and
yeah.
so that's very, very important, that the honoring of parents is a lifetime event for you, not for your parents, but for yourself, because just because they're gone, you don't stop honoring them. You honor them, particularly in memory. That's the way you really honor them, is by remembering them, visiting their grave site, saying prayers at certain temple services. So I think that's also very important to understand.
That another way of looking at it is doing good deeds
In
in their honor.
Their name.
You know, it's another way of expressing that. Yes.
I also acknowledge my father by accepting and honoring that part of me that I recognize I got from him, like my adventurousness.
Okay.
Because, like, you know, many years, believe me, I didn't honor my father, but after his death, I see how much of me, how much of him is in me. And by acknowledging that, that's honoring him.
Now, I'm surprised nobody brought up, that's good, Ricky.
Yeah.
I'm surprised nobody brought up what happens if your parents do very harmful things to you.
Mine have.
Do you still honor them?
Well, I'll tell you, my brother doesn't want to hear the name of my father. I went to Argentina to see in the cemetery the graves of my father's parents, and I brought him to show it. He said, "I don't want to see it. I don't care anything. I paid a lot of therapy to forget about him.
Okay.
I don't want him to be mentioned. No honor after the death."
Marty, that's what I was alluding to when I said that for many years, I certainly did not honor my father because of my childhood, which I won't go into. I'll just use the word. I was an abused child. Boom. Okay. And so it took a long time. And actually, Mary, talked about her brother and therapy. I've had, my 12-step program was my therapy. I mean, I did therapy too, but I like, for example, what Biden says, one day you're going to realize that there's a smile on your face before a tear comes to your eye about the departed one. And that's what I've come to when I said that I now acknowledge and honor my father through acknowledging what part of him is in me, even though we had a lot of very, very, very rough years. So yes, but it came much later after. I mean, it wasn't something that you can just get to and just say, okay, well, I don't care if I was abused, I'm going to honor him. It just doesn't happen like that. It's a process.
Sure. So what happens if a parent does something very good? You're treated badly, but they do something that's very good and could be honored for that.
I'll continue.
Okay.
My mother left me alone with my father. And I know that my father really struggled to make sure that I was always safe and okay. I was boarded out for a long time, but that was all he could do. So even though there was the abuse, he was the one that made sure that I was, that I lived. So the love-hate relationship can really screw your mind because you don't know which side.
Sure.
And so that was another thing to see. Where he borrowed money from Shylocks, loan sharks, to be able to pay the people that were housing me. That's how far he went to the good.
Sure.
As well as the other.
So it's not as close. By the way, this whole session is based on the discussions that take place in Talmud. Okay, it's not that clear, and you have to. And the Talmud gives not just one side; they talk about the other side of the argument, and it becomes very, very interesting as you see. And that they are recognizing that although the majority may think a certain way, and that there is a legitimate other way of looking at it. So I think that it's very good. And so we just have had an exercise in a Talmudic discussion. Okay, that was done by design because these are touchy subjects, and we're going to get into more next week. Okay, and we've only skimmed the surface. The other thing that I want to end this is, I wonder if after this passage, the response of the Jewish people, of the Israelites, is to build the golden calf. Is this too much for them to understand? Is all of this, do they lose something in, oh my goodness, there's so much here. It's a total change in my life because they came out of slavery where none of this was even mentioned. So I just raised that as a question to think about as we go through all of probably the next 2 weeks, going in over the rules and laws. It's an awful lot of change and that they would have to realize in their lives at the time. So I don't know. That's why I say think about it.